Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Vote Common Good podcast. A common good morning to you, as we like to say around here. And look, our podcast and live stream is new to us in this rendition. So we're so glad that you're here. And as the old joke goes, it's good to be seen by you as well. So good to see you around here. We would love to have you make any comments. If you're watching this on any of the streams that you are, make a comment. We're using a software that allows us to see all of those comments. And you're going to meet our producers today. We're going to talk a little bit about ideology. We're going to talk about Black History Month. We're going to talk about insurrections and what we can all do about it. So a lot going on. And basically, around here, as people of common good faith, we're going to take this positive, hopeful, and open-eyed approach to the questions of what's going on in our world and what can I do to shine a light on it. So that's what we're going to be doing around Vote Common Good. And we want you to see faith, hope, and love for a change in this country like we did on Election Day. We traveled the country and said, hey, let's let our faith shine. Let's let our light shine a little bit and see if we can bring about a change on Election Day. And it actually happened. Now, I'm Doug Padgett. I'm your host. And today we're going to, like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about this podcast because we're just launching it now and as a live stream. And so much more is going to be happening with us. If you haven't yet gone over to Vote Common Good and been on our website, please do. We'd love to see you over there. Get signed up for our email list. We know a bunch of you are watching this on Facebook and on Instagram and on Twitch and on Twitter and all that, which we'll talk about in a bit. But if you haven't been to our website to get our email list, a lot happens in our email list. It's actually a really important part of what we're doing and how we're doing it in the world. So we'd love to have you join us over there. And also go to our, when you go to the Facebook or to the website page, go to the podcast section and sign up for the podcast. I know you hear this when you listen to other podcasts, but it's actually true. When you subscribe to the podcast, that adds into our total group of people that are listening. That helps us spread the word about this podcast. It's really important. If you're watching on YouTube, click that subscribe button. We'll get to all that here in a little bit. So we'd love to have you do that. Head over to votecommongood.com/podcast, sign up and get yourself this coming into your podcast feed. Now, if you're new to podcasts or I know some people who are like, look, I watch this stuff on social media streams. I don't really download podcasts. Maybe this is your chance. Maybe Vote Common Good's daily podcast is going to be your first time that you're going to be in a podcast. In fact, if that's true, write that in the comments wherever you're listening right now and let us know that you are joining in through the podcast stream, because we'd love to have you we'd love to see you around here. Now, look, we're going to be doing a lot of different things with our daily podcast. They're going to run about an hour long. Sometimes they'll be a little longer, I guess. On off chance, they could actually be a little bit shorter. But on Mondays, we're going to be talking about common good news. So it's going to be sort of a news featured day. That's what we're doing today. So we'd love to have you join us on Mondays where we talk about what's going on in the world, what's happening in the news, things we all need to be thinking about. Then on Tuesdays, we're going to turn our attention to politics. Rob Ryerson and I are going to host that day. See, I'm going to be a host on a lot of these days, but then you're going to meet all these other really great hosts. So we look forward to you meeting them. Rob and I are going to be talking about the role of electoral politics. And look, I know even though you're into Vote Common Good, there's so many people who just really aren't into politics. We're going to help change that. We're going to help you understand how politics can really be this encouraging and inspirational way for you to engage as a human being in your life, in your faith, and in the civic engagement of this country. So that's what we're going to be doing on our politics. In fact, tomorrow, on the first edition of the Tuesday Common Good Politics Day, we're going to have an expert in conspiracy theories. He's a professor at a university in California. He's going to be on talking to us about why do people believe conspiracy theories? See, one thing that's happened in our politics, it's been taken over by a rash of conspiracy theories. So we're going to talk to him about what we can do about that, how we can engage. And with all of our podcast days, this is designed to help you see what's going on in the world and figure out how you can shed a little light on it. On Wednesdays, we turn our attention to faith. And we're joined by Laura Truax, by Dominique Gilliard, by Stephanie Spalding, and me. So we're going to be talking about the role of our faith. For all of us, we're Christians, we're Christian pastors, and 4 Christian pastors talking from a variety of vantage points about our faith in the world that we live in today. I think you're going to love it. Now, look, you might say, boy, I'm more interested in politics than I am faith, or the other way around. I'm more interested in the faith than politics. In our podcast stream, you'll be able to find just the stream that you want. They'll be listed by day and listed by topic. Now, I think, you're going to want all of them. You're going to want to engage in every one of them, including on Thursdays where we talk about crucial issues. So Thursday is going to have a little bit of a different feel. We're going to talk about topics and issues that we know matter to us. We're going to talk about issues like abortion, because that matters so much to people of faith when it comes to their political life. But we're also going to talk about things like a narrative in our country that says that some groups, white people, are better than other groups like black people. We're going to talk about issues of white supremacy and racial injustice. We're also going to talk about things like the environment. This Thursday, we're going to have a group on that's put together this beautiful documentary helping us understand the connection between the Christian right and anti-environmentalism. They put together a documentary called God and Green, and they're super clever. They use the $ for the and between God and green. So we're going to be talking about things like that on Thursday. And then on Friday, we turn our attention to something we think matters so much, which is science. Paul Wallace, who's an astrophysicist, is going to be our co-host on Fridays. So, okay, all that to say that there is a lot that's going to be going on in this podcast. So we know that daily is a lot. We know that there's going to be a whole range of ideas and thoughts and perspectives and voices. And around Vote Common Good, we think that's a really good idea. That's what we want. The reason we're doing a daily podcast, and then if it really goes well and we can get some best ofs together, maybe we'll combine all that together on the weekends and give you just a best of weekend podcast with some special features to it, is because we know that there are so many issues that we have to talk about. We can't just talk about politics. We can't just talk about faith. We can't just talk about civic engagement. We can't just talk about issues. We have to be able to talk about all of it. And we keep meeting around Vote Common Good. We keep meeting really, really interesting people. So the reason we're going to do this thing every day, the reason we're going to have a weekday daily podcast is because there's just too many people for you to meet for us to just do something once a week or twice a week or 3 times a week. All right. Now, lots of ways you can get this podcast. I already mentioned that you can get it over at the podcast link. But if you just want the live stream, you can go to Vote Common Good page on Facebook. So find us over there because that's a really great place for you to connect. Maybe you're somebody on Twitter and you're watching this, say, on Facebook, but you also want to know that we're on Twitter. Go to Vote Common. See, at Twitter, we just abbreviate everything because they limit the number of letters that you can have in your username. So if there wasn't enough room for Vote Common Good, most everything else is sort of the social stream / Vote Common Good, but not at Twitter. Twitter's just Vote Common. So find us over there and follow us too, would you? If you're a tweeter. Okay, now here's one we're going to be using, which is new to me, Twitch.tv. Do y'all know Twitch? I don't know if you're familiar with Twitch, but Twitch is something else. It is a video live streaming social space. Vote Common Good is on it. Now, lots of other things are on Twitch as well, like people playing video games. But we're on there as well. So if you're new to Twitch, or if you're like, unbelievable, Vote Common Good has found itself over to Twitch. By the way, we're also on TikTok, but that's a whole different vibe that's going on. And of course, we're over on Instagram. So if you're following us on Instagram, now we have a special little Instagram setup because Instagram is the special kid in the group. So we have to have a phone pointing at an iPad for the stream on Instagram, but we'll talk about all of that stuff later. And of course, we're over at YouTube. So go to youtube.com/c/Vote Common Good. That's how YouTube does their fancy little URLs. And by the way, when you're over there at Vote Common Good or on the YouTube channel on Vote Common Good, be sure you subscribe, because if we get to a certain number of subscribers on a YouTube channel, that allows us to not only use monetization, but to do a whole lot of other things inside the YouTube channel. So, okay. And again, you're going to want to find this all over at the podcast link if you just want the audio podcast. All right. So enough of that, enough of all the things that we have going on and all the places that we're going to be pushing this out to you. Hey, this is my home studio. And by the way, today I'm standing up. I'm running a stand-up desk. Some days I'll do this while sitting down. But, they say that sitting is the new smoking. I actually know people who sit and smoke, so I don't know what that means for them. But sitting is the new smoking, they say, and you have to stand up. And because we're spending all of these hours putting podcasts together, I'm going to do some of these days standing up. Now, what are you doing? How are you following on this? How are you listening? If you're in the podcast stream only and you're listening to this on the podcast, why don't you send us an email to podcast@votecommongood.com. Tell us how you listen. Or if you're on any of those social channels, give us a comment. Are you sitting on your couch with your laptop in front of you? Or do you have your phone in your hand? Are you, like I know a lot of people do when they scroll through and watch videos, are you, in that part of the house where you take care of your personal business? Just let us know where you find yourself and how you're engaging in our stream today, because we want to know what you're up to, and so do other people, because we're trying to build a community of people that are paying attention to what's going on in this world and figuring out what we can all do about it. All right, section 2. By the way, this podcast today is going to come in 6 sections. So section 2. Hey, there's a huge storm happening out on the East Coast, by the way. So those of you that are in New York or in Boston or in Pennsylvania, out on the upper eastern seaboard, the weather outside is frightful, apparently. Now, I live in Minnesota. I'm looking out the window. It's a lovely winter day, and you all are getting like 8 to 12, 14 inches. So perfect day for you to snuggle in with a live stream or snuggle in with a podcast, and we hope everything goes well. I was thinking about making some comments in the news side of this about GameStop and about how the people on Reddit rigged the system for the selling and short selling of those stocks. But honestly, I've watched a whole lot of explanations of this thing. I still don't get it. Frankly, I don't understand sometimes how people use complicated algorithms to figure out how to short sell and how to sell and to release and then to buy back and do all this stuff with stocks. And let me just make one comment about that. Maybe you feel the same way. Maybe you feel like, I don't really know what's going on with that. I mean, I hear the explanations, but I just kind of don't get it. Look, I'm telling you, that's a problem. When the stock market represents as much power and influence in our society as it does, when so many people think first about how the stock market is doing or how their 401k is doing or how their pension plan that's connected to some kind of investments are doing, and it has all this power about our future, and then people somehow, bring down a hedge fund and some guy makes $34 million who's been sort of planning this pushback to the short sale of GameStop. And a bunch of people like us who really do pay attention to the world, because if you're watching this live stream or listening to this podcast, you're somebody who pays attention to the world. And we don't know how that works. That tells you there's some funny business going on. And anytime your future is in the hands of other people who are doing things that you don't understand how they work, that's a moment for you to take a breath and say, maybe the way the stock market is organized, maybe the way the stock market functions, maybe the power that it has, needs to be looked at a bit. I saw Senator Bernie Sanders on a news program yesterday. He's in charge of the budget committee for the Senate, which is actually great news, I think. And he said, look, I think the stock market's rigged and is being used by people for all kinds of purposes. Now, Bernie Sanders does have a tendency to say that things are rigged, and I don't have a great appetite right now for things are rigged. But I think he's right on this one. I think he's right about the fact that the stock market's got something going on, that some people know the rules. Some people know how it functions. Others of us are just being impacted and affected by it, and that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. So that's up in the news. Hey, also in the news, Joe Biden is having to now fulfill his campaign promise to build unity across the country. And guess what the Republicans are doing? Now I'm going to try not to beat up on Republicans every time we have one of these podcasts, but honestly, if you're a Republican, and you're especially if you're a Republican elected official, you got to get your house in order, because there's some wacky business going on over there. I mean, there are people saying things that represent the most fringe of this culture and society that we have, of which people have the freedom of speech and the freedom of belief in this country to believe and to say wacky things. I just don't think everybody should be a representative in the United States House of Representatives or in the Senate. So when people start representing these ideas there, it has impact on all of us. But there's some stuff going on inside of the Republican Party that I think has to be looked at. And here's their great trick. Hey, Joe Biden, you said you wanted to be a unifier. Well, then we hold the power of unity. So if you don't do things that we want to do, then you didn't fulfill your campaign promise. They're literally talking like that today. Here's my advice to the president. Mr. President, Talk about unifying the voters. Don't talk about unifying Congress and the senators. Let your Congress people and your senators follow the voters. Go right to the voters. Let that be your place of unity. Talk to them. We're going to help do that. Talk to these people. Show them how they can live inside of a unified United States of America as voters, and then they'll bring their elected officials along, because these Republicans seem to have no compulsion whatsoever to actually lead people. For a lot of us, we think that our elected leaders, even in a representative form of democracy, should actually lead. That one of the things they ought to be doing is leading. And yet what we see out of Republicans, my opinion, feel free to share yours in the comment, is people who don't want to lead, people who just simply say, when it serves their better interests, oh, this is what the voters want. Sorry, we can't speak up about this because it seems that the voters want this. No, okay, another promise here. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about Donald Trump in this podcast, unless we have to, because he's a former president who lost an election and is out of the White House, and we don't have to fuss with him anymore. But like a natural disaster that happens in our country, the effects of that natural disaster, well, they linger and the cleanup has to happen, right? You think about Hurricane Katrina, you think about Joplin, Missouri, you think about places where there are tornadoes or even huge winter storms like are happening in the Upper East Coast right now. These kinds of things, they have long-term ramifications. Even when the storm is gone, yeah, and that's a little wink to you friends over at QAnon. When the storm is gone, then there's all the cleanup. So we got a little bit of cleanup that we still have to do around Donald Trump. Got to finish an impeachment. In fact, we'd love for you to go over to votecommongood.com and click on our petition telling the Senate that you want to see a conviction of Donald Trump on the charge of inciting an insurrection. But there's a little bit of cleanup that we have to do. So we're not going to spend all of our time talking about Donald Trump, I promise, but it is something that we do need to address on occasion. And when the Republican Party continues to say, but Donald Trump's supporters and voters are the ones that we want, there's just no working with these people for the Biden administration until they say that unity means that we come together for the common good, not for our political benefit. The Republicans have been rickrolling the Democrats for years, all the way back to the Obama administration when they tried the same thing. And then they literally said, here's what we need for us to sign on to the healthcare bill. And then Democrats gave it all to them, weakened Obamacare so that now it's still damaged by that bargain. And then after they demanded these changes, then the Republicans said, and we're still not voting for it. So they haven't acted in good faith for more than a decade. And the idea that they're going to do it now, when they're telling the public and they're telling the Biden administration what they're going to do, that they're going to try to stand in the way of unity so that Joe Biden can't fulfill his election promise. It's just unbelievable. So please, Biden administration, build unity in the country with the voters, even if you have to leave some of the hundreds of elected officials of the Republican Party to the side. And on that, look, this COVID relief bill that's happening right now, it's gotta get pushed through. Is $1.9 trillion a lot? Yeah, it's a lot. You know when you'd spend $1.9 trillion? When there's a year-long global pandemic that has shut down our economy, has closed our schools, has nearly bankrupted our states and cities. Yeah, that seems like a time when the federal government would want to use the power of the federal government to leverage the movement of dollars into our economy and to spend that kind of money. There are just times where you have to spend your way into success. And this is one of those times. So I think it is, whether it's 1.9 trillion or 2.6 trillion or 1.4 trillion, you know what it's not, Republicans? 600 billion. I mean, these same people who are now saying we can't spend that kind of money didn't seem to have a problem when there were tax cuts that sent a entire portion of our economy into deficit spending. So this is the time when you spend that kind of money. We're going to talk about economics in this podcast on some of these days going forward, so we're not going to get into it now. But just a little caveat. When the federal government spends money, they don't spend it on themselves. There's no mechanism for the federal government to spend money other than to put the money into the economy. The federal government's spending redistributes the money from the tax revenues into our society. So you spend money, it goes into the economy. And what's the one thing that everyone knows fuels an economy? Fuel. And if it's a financial economy, it needs money to move through the system. All right. How about if we try a little bit of conversation about this crazy impeachment and insurrection that happened? Now, I'm just going to play a little video for you here in the background because I don't want us to ever forget what the insurrectionists did. The insurrectionists in this country plotted, schemed, joined together, and ran on the Capitol. How many people were involved in this same thing? How many people were engaged in this? It's in the hundreds. It's in the thousands. Might it include some people who are in elected office? Maybe. But you know who it definitely includes? People with Trump flags and people with QAnon flags and people with the Christian flag. Here's the thing. There is no way that insurrection happens in our society without the support and care of religious white voters. They were all over it. The people who took over the Senate stopped and the Senate dais stopped and prayed a prayer in Jesus' name that sounded just like it was at some kind of an evangelical church or summer youth camp. These people speak the vernacular of faith. They came in under faith. Now, did they cheat the faith? Did they lie about the faith? Did they steal the faith? Of course. But that's what people do. And when people of good faith see other people running bad on your story, you got to speak up. So we are not only dealing with a one-time insurrection. And look, the habit of this country is when there are, people of white nationalist impulses, say Timothy McVeigh, say the bombers at the Boston Marathon, say the mass shooters, then we all stop and say, oh, you know what you're talking about? You're just talking about a lone wolf here. I mean, all we can do is sort of reflect on the fact that, onesies and twosies, certain people are going to do crazy things. But the FBI, Homeland Security are all saying the number one threat in this country to the stability of this country is organized white supremacists and white nationalists. And who's at the root of all of that? People of faith. So what happened on January 6th cannot be forgotten. Look, I don't want to think about it all the time. I don't want to play these videos. I don't want us to have to see over and over how these people, full of such anger and such rage, were willing and felt that it was their right to do it. I mean, the level at which they said, we will come into this city, we will organize on the internet, we will brag about it, we will live stream while we're doing it because we're on the side of the people who get to do whatever they want. That is what's at the heart of this insurrection. And that is what has to be at the heart of any kind of a response to this insurrection. Now, there's some deep issues that go on in our society. But in my opinion, there's a group of people who are willing to push against pretty much everything that holds this country together. And somehow they tell themselves that they're doing it. Well, that's just your patriotic response. Well, the rest of us, we have a name for it. It's called an insurrection. Now, look, this country was born in insurrection. Here's the problem that we haven't dealt with. The things that birthed this country, black slavery, insurrection against your government, those things continue to permeate our society, right? And because we don't talk about them and because we don't deal with them. they continue to show up. So if we don't talk about how the Revolutionary War is not equivalent to stop the steal, Donald Trump was the duly elected president, and we need to run on the Congress on the day that they're going to certify the Electoral College votes and maybe consider hanging the vice president and the Speaker of the House, that's not the same thing as how we want to understand our own freedom of 1776. If we don't want to have that conversation, then we're in serious trouble. Because if we continue to allow these white nationalists, white supremacists, Christian nationalists to continue to move with cultural freedom and not call it out, then the future of this country is settled. And it's not the place any of us want to see it go. Look, part 3. We're going to talk more about conspiracy theories tomorrow, but we need to make an argument for this country. Demographic changes aren't going to be enough. A lot of us have paid a lot of attention to what happened in this election in 2020. And there were some great successes that were brought to us by the people who drove turnout. Black voter turnout, way up. Latino turnout, way up. Women voters, way up. Every classification of voter in this country, up. The most voters in any election in the history of our country, in the midst of a pandemic. Only one group, though, changed their overall vote for Donald Trump to away from Donald Trump. All the other gains came from voter turnout going up. But in every category except one, the percentage of people who voted for Donald Trump in every category went up in 2020 versus 2016. The percentage. Now, you got to think about how percentages work, right? I actually should have a graphic for this. But the percentage can go up, but the overall numbers still go up. So in other words, if 60% of people vote for Donald Trump in 2016, and then, if 40% of people vote for Donald Trump in 2016 in a particular group, and then in 2020, that number goes from 40% to 45%. That's a 5% increase of that group. But there's still a 15-point margin between the people who didn't vote for Donald Trump and the people who did. And because the overall number went up, all those numbers get bigger. But the percentage change only changed in one group. It wasn't black voters. It wasn't Latino voters. It wasn't women voters. It was white males. Every other group had more people by percentage, a higher percentage, vote for Donald Trump in 2020 than voted for him in 2016. Think about that for a minute. Now, again, more people voted, which is why the margins were higher. But the percentage went the wrong way, in my opinion. I have a friend who works with a fantastic group called Muslims for Progressive Values, Ani Zanaveld. She's terrific, spectacular. She's going to be a guest on this podcast a number of times. She told me that among Muslim voters, 16% voted for Donald Trump in 2016. To some people, they're like, that's an unbelievably high number. But 32% of Muslim voters voted for Donald Trump in 2020. Doubled the percentage. The only group that changed its percentage, that had a decline in number, are white males. And the subset of that, Christian white males. Now, this is really confusing business, right? Because we've all been making the joke about the crazy uncle. And, I'm an uncle, and some people might think I'm a little nutty. So I might be the crazy uncle, on the other side of the equation. But white males moved. White males shifted away from Donald Trump, percentage-wise and overall numbers-wise. The only group. Here's what I'm getting at. You will hear people tell you that demographics are destiny. They're not. Just saying that the country is going to become more female, the country is going to become less white. What 2016 to 2020 showed us was you cannot expect that simply that shift is going to bring about the changes that we want. The two things that happened in 2020 from 2016 need to continue to happen. One, voter turnout needs to go up. But let me tell you how hard that is. All the people who work so hard, especially in Georgia and especially in Pennsylvania and in Michigan and Wisconsin, the amount of time, the amount of energy, the amount of work, the organization that had to happen in the midst of a demagogue of a president to drive up voter turnout. It was heroic, Herculean, you might call it. So much took to move that voter turnout up. The other thing that happened, in smaller percentage, but significant, and without it, we wouldn't have seen the outcome of this election the way we saw it. Persuasion. We have to persuade people. We can't simply say, well, at some point, demographics are going to change. The psychographic also has to change. If we don't change not only who votes, but how voters think about the world, then there are other people who are going to be making these arguments. I mean, this is the thing that we want to do at Vote Common Good and that we want you in on. And this is our part 4 of today. To do ideological persuasion. To do what in the religious terminology would be evangelism. To invite people to move from one way of living and thinking and being to another way of living and thinking and being. To ask people to make a shift. And please don't think that, well, someone else is going to do all that, and then what you will do is come in and just work on voter turnout. Because we cannot continue to hope for 2 or 3 or 4% voter turnout increase every year. And if all we're doing is turning out voters and leaving the persuasion of how those voters think to other people, this is not going to go well in this country. Now, I want to be clear about a couple of things, and I've written a whole bunch about this. This is not a book promotion, but it might want to be. I wrote a book called Evangelism in the Inventive Age. I refer to this period we live in as the Inventive Age. And it's this idea that says, look, when you're going to recruit someone or call for evangelism or call for an ideological shift, you're not asking them to conform to your way of thinking. This isn't some kind of mind control, which a lot of people have experienced, any evangelistic effort, whether it's religious evangelism or someone trying to get you into CrossFit, that it can feel like they're just wanting to conform you to their pattern of the world. My friend Toby likes to say, don't tell me that your experience needs to become my obligation, which I think is just a great phrase, right? Your experience is not my obligation. And that's what a lot of people feel like, recruitment or evangelism or calling someone to think differently about the world. It's not about conforming. It's about transforming. It's about saying to people, hey, I bet you're not happy with how things are going. How about if we think about the world in a different way? So it's an invitation into transformation. And it also, frankly, has to be about good news, and then it has to resonate with the person. So it has to be something that people would say, yes, that's what I want, and then it has to click with them and fit with them. And personally, I do a lot of protesting, right? I stand outside of buildings with signs. I go in marches. I've had the police fire rubber bullets and tear gas in my face. I'm comfortable with protesting. Much more than I ever used to be. I used to really be opposed to the protest culture. Just for me, I'm like, not my thing. I'm just not doing the protesting. That has radically changed. I'm a big believer in what is referred to as nonviolent protest actions. What went on in the insurrection? Not a protest. That's an insurrection and a riot. But when you get out and you express your voice and you say no, you protestify against something and for something. Really important. Lots of people do really great work around protests. I'm so glad to be part of it. From the death penalty, through tax policy, to policing, all kinds of issues. But when I'm talking about here, persuasion, it's not protest. It's not calling people out. We need to. That's what protests do. It's call out culture. It's crucial. But we also have to call people in. And if we don't call people into something, and that's what evangelism is. That's what calling someone to a new way of life and a new way of being and a new way of thinking. That's what the religious word repentance is all about, that someone thinks in one way and then pivots and now thinks in another way, and that new way of thinking and understanding and seeing the world affects how they live. That takes proactive action. That takes planning. That takes organizing. That's a thing that I think really, really matters. So we're going to talk about that in this podcast. We hope that this podcast becomes something that for you, not only will motivate you into protest when it needs to happen. And look, we're going to have to protest the Biden administration. Biden administration isn't going to get everything right. They need to hear from us. We're going to have to raise our fists. We're going to have to raise our voices. We're going to have to call out the things that we know don't bring about the common good. Every administration in the history of the country has required people of common good faith to do that. And the Biden administration is going to be no different. Now, the question will be, how do they respond? And I think they're going to respond in some really good and positive ways. But we also have to be proactive and engaging with the people in our lives. And we want to help you do that. So we're going to do it in this podcast. We're also going to be providing some training, some seminars. We're going to have a whole program on how to work on de-radicalization of people in your life, people who are falling down some of the conspiracy theory tracks. So we want you to be a part of all that. That's why we ask you to go over to votecommongood.com and get on our email list. That's why we want you to subscribe to all this, because we want you to keep up on all that we have going on. Now, let me just say a word here about ideology, and then I want to introduce Mary Beth and Daniel Dietrich to you, because they're our producers on the show, and you're going to get to meet all these people, and they're going to be a part of nearly every podcast that comes out one way or the other, so you're going to have a chance to meet them. But let me just say something about an ideology. I'm pro-ideology. I know people will often say, like, hey, don't be ideological, be practical. I think I get what they're saying. Like, don't be so rigidly locked into only one way of thinking that you just can't seem to think in any other way. Like don't become rigid. Okay, fair enough. But here's what an ideology is. Can I start with a Wikipedia definition? I'll read this for you. I really should pop it up on the screen, but Mary Beth and Daniel, remind me to make more slides to go on the side over here. So from Wikipedia, an ideology is a certain set of ethical ideals, principles, and doctrines or symbols of a social movement or large group that explains how society works and offers some political and cultural blueprint for a certain social order. All right, let me break that down. But it's a really great definition. Sometimes Wikipedia just does it right. Here's what an ideology does. An ideology has three parts to it. Basically, it tells you, here's the story of the world. Now, that can be the globe, that can be the planet's development, that can be human society, that could be your family, that could be your business. It tells you how the world functions. What's the story of the world? And then it tells you how the world should be. So your ideology says, here's the story of the world, and here's how it should be. And then thirdly, it gives you a role for bringing that world about. Here's the story of the world. Here's how it ought to be. Here's how we participate in it to bring that about. That's what an ideology is. Now look, some of us politically, we need a little more of the second and third part of ideology, right? We need a little bit more of how should the world be, and saying to people, and here's how you can participate in it. And it's that third portion that I think is the most beautiful part of evangelism. It's not just saying to someone, here's the story of the world, here's how it ought to be, and I mean, too bad for all of us, it ain't nothing like that. So now, one of the answers is hold on tight and someone's going to come and rescue us from this. And other people have other ways of calling us into the action of how the world ought to be. So this podcast, whether it's Mondays, whether it's Tuesdays when we talk about politics, Wednesdays on faith, Thursday on different hot issues in our society, Fridays on science and economics, whatever topic it is, what we want to do is help you see the world, understand the way that it could be, and give you a pathway for action in it. So that's what we're going to be trying to do. Now, if you're good at this, if there's topics you want, if there's things you want to give us input on, again, in the comments here, or send an email over to podcast@votecommongood.com, and we will take all of that into account. Today, I have obviously blabbered on for nearly 42 minutes, and it might happen on Mondays with some sort of news analysis and opinionating, but go the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays, it's going to be a whole collection of people. So your screen is going to be filled with faces and your ear pods are going to be filled with all kinds of voices. So we're super glad to have you all around here. So that's Daniel. That's Mary Beth. producers extraordinaire. Yeah, on those real podcasts, people like at the end, they take like 6 minutes to tell you all the people that made it possible. Well, our hosts, our guests, and the three of us. That's it. It'll be quick and dirty every time. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Mary Beth. All right. Final bit here. Part 6. You might know this already, but it's Black History Month. February has been designated as Black History Month. Really great. It's important. I'm glad that it is. But you know what else is Black history? It's American history. It's one of these moments where we have to ask ourselves, are we benefiting by the fact that we segregate out 1 month and say, this is a time where we'll talk about Black history? Because there is no American history that's not Black history. Now, I'm all for looking at the specific ways that Black culture and Black communities have been impacted by, and more importantly, have made America the great country that it is and can be. There is no goodness in this country that doesn't owe itself to the Black community and to Black history. Absolutely. And at the same time, it's American history. There's no separating it out. It's not as if, yeah, there was this Black history and this is how Black people experience the world. And then there's American history. No, there's American history. And what this month ought to do is to ask us to give a little bit of a focus on the contribution of Black community. I saw this image on Facebook that said, please stop saying the country has never been so divided. That was the meme sort of headline. And then it was a picture of Black only and white only water fountains from 57 years ago. And you could go back into the 1920s, and you could go back into the 1860s, and you could go back into the 1700s, and you could go back into the 1600s when people came to this country and took the land from the indigenous peoples. Oh, we've been divided. We've been divided for a long time. That doesn't mean that this moment of division, that this moment of pain is not ours to address. Sure it is. But we don't have to compare it. We don't have to say this is the most or that was the most, because this is ours. It doesn't matter if it's the most or the least. We're not in some competition of age against age. This is our time. We need to respond. And Black history has to be paid attention to. And on this podcast and Vote Common Good, we're going to do a lot of that. We're going to be paying a lot of attention in February and in all the work that we do to be sure that we understand how it is that every member of our society, specifically the groups that have been pushed away and pushed out and held down and oppressed, the people of the Black communities of this country, have contributed so greatly. So the Black history of this country is American history, and it matters to all of us, and we need to find all the ways that we can pay about it. I want to show you a video. This is one that I saw on the internet and I hope they think it's okay that we showed it. This actually could present a problem on our live stream because it's a music video. It's music that includes a musician named Milk, who I'm a big fan of. And Amanda Gorman, who's the poet laureate, the youth poet laureate that spoke at the inauguration. The day before the inauguration, they were a part of a online conference that some people, I think, from the Kellogg Foundation put together. And they did a portion of it on racial healing. And I just think it's spectacular. So I was really struck by it, thought it was great, and would love for you to see it. It's a video that they put together, and I heard an interview about it in December. So they put this together in December and then had it ready for January 5th to play just before the inauguration. So, or January 19th, just before the inauguration. So here it is. I think it says what I hope we're saying around here, and I hope that you really enjoy it.
Racial healing is incredibly important, especially right now, because no one benefits from a system of inequality. It plagues and curses and affects us all. And now, more than ever, we have the opportunity to reconcile with our past racism and imagine a multiracial democracy where everyone has equal chances.
I think that a lot of the pain that is projected onto people different from us is a reflection of the pain that we have within ourselves. So racial healing would mean internal healing as well. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to join and learn from activists and social change artists who want to bring a better world into existence.
She was somebody's daughter, somebody's friend, someone who built her dreams with every breath, whom others could depend. More than a number, more than a story, more than a memory. Somebody's friend, somebody's daughter, somebody's beloved. Blood on leaves falling like autumn. Her story has been told 1,000 times. Why doesn't everybody scream? For anyone listening, say her name. Say her name.
How do we heal after the loss of a daughter? When will the whole world holler to dress the wound? We first have to address the pain. To honor the person, we must first say the name. And sometimes, to heal the burn, we must first forgive the flame. We reconcile what has been wrecked, recover what has been covered over, and mend that which has gone unmentioned. It is one thing to remedy, to stitch ourselves toward a past norm, but racial healing calls us to transform into something better, something more, like the broken bone that becomes stronger than before.
He was somebody's father, somebody's son, someone who dreamt of seeing his daughter grow taller and fall in love. More than a number, more than a story, more than a memory. Somebody's son, somebody's father, somebody's beloved. Blood on leaves falling like autumn. The story has been told 1,000 times. Why doesn't everybody scream? For anyone listening, say his name. Say his name.
How do we heal after the loss of a son? We fix the world. We have become, we do the work that needs to get done. And instead of calling out our enemies, we call them into conversations and into our hearts. All of our actions rush on like a great river toward the horizon. Each healing, each endeavor, or every drop of hope is a truth and a treasure. So how do we heal? Together, together, together.
More than just a
Let's
number.
Say it together.
More than
Let's
just
say
a
it.
story.
Say it together.
More than a memory. Say their name. Say their name. Say their names. They were somebody's first call, somebody's home, someone who lived with tears and laughter, who wanted to belong. More than a number, more than a story, more than a memory. Somebody's home, somebody's first call, somebody's beloved. Somebody's first call, somebody's beloved.
I don't know about you, but that is so good, right? So that is a song. You can watch the video of Milk that she did, and it's about people who've lost children to gun violence. And then Amanda Gorman put a spoken word over the top of it, and then they combined those two together, where these art forms start to make commentary on one another and create something new. You know, Amanda Gorman's big push there and at the inauguration in her work is together, together, together is how we do this. And she's not somebody who takes togetherness as a simple platitude, right? Milk, Amanda Gorman, these people are the current leaders of social movements in this country. And active and artist activists, as Milk put it at the beginning. So I think it's really great, and it's a bit of a theme for, at least for me, and I hope for this podcast as we push ourselves forward. Again, really glad to have you with us today. It's our inaugural podcast and live stream. I'm going to go back to Daniel and Mary Beth. We're thrilled to be with all of you, and I'm seeing lots of these comments on the social streams. We will do more to put those up and to put those out. And those of you that are on the podcast, we'll find ways for you also to be contributing to these podcast comments and to get these back to us. So thanks so much. We're going to be back tomorrow. Most of the days, this podcasts are gonna be recorded and live streamed at 10 a.m. Central Time, except on Wednesdays when it's at 9 a.m. Central Time. So if you want to be part of the live stream on this, it's 10 a.m. every day except for Wednesday at 9 a.m. So we'll see you tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., when our conversation turns specifically to the question of politics and how we're political in this world. And again, we're going to talk with a professor who specializes in conspiracy theories. So super glad to have you around today. Thanks for being a part of all of this, and common good morning to you all.